Hello, guys and gals, me Mudahar, and ladies and gentlemen, today I want to talk a little bit about, the Skynet situation that we're actually in now. I talked about this a while back, not too long ago, but it seems like things are actually accelerating in a way that I've never really seen before. So we talked about a company known as Palantir. Now, for a quick primer, I have a whole deep dive video that I made on it, but just a quick update here. Palantir is a company that is basically a data company in the United States that effectively works a lot with law enforcement agencies and the government to basically process data and allow for basically mass surveillance to be a thing. Now, ladies and gentlemen, one of the things that they posted the other day was actually so fucking unhinged that this could be its own video in its own right. But I'm actually going to look at this and go a little bit deeper and see exactly how wild situations are getting, because I think for people to understand just how fucked up this company is, people need to look through the miasma and sort of basically amalgamate all of the shit that these people are doing so that everybody doesn't get confused. They just know how to go forward. They know how to fight back. So anyways, Palantir posts this brief from the Technological Republic. For anybody that doesn't know this is a book written by Alexander Karp. Yes, the actual CEO, the person who runs Palantir. This unhinged, unwashed individual writes all of these points. So we're going to go review them. Obviously, some of these points, people were kind of looking at it, they were blinking twice. One of them was Silicon Valley owes a moral debt to the country that made its rise possible. The engineering elite of Silicon Valley has an affirmative obligation to participate in the defense of the nation. There's a lot of defense talk over here too. He talks about how you gotta rebel against the tyranny of the apps. Is the iPhone our greatest creative, if not crowning achievement as a civilization? How fucking closed off is your... Goddamn. The object has changed our lives, but it may also now be limiting and constraining our sense of the possible. What is the possible, friend? Well, he also goes down and starts mentioning things like, the question is not whether AI weapons will be built, it is who will build them and for what purpose. Our adversaries will not pause to indulge in theatrical debates about the merits of developing technologies. They will proceed. Now, a lot of people will look at this and think, yeah, that makes sense. The Chinese and the Russians will probably make some crazy autonomous killer drones. And in some cases, those already exist, okay? We live in a world where LLMs, and thankfully for now, humans who are still in the loop, basically press Y or N on their keyboard and decide if somebody lives or dies. But the future of this technology is not having that human in the loop. Eventually, the actual reality, and this is the scary part, is when these systems are allowed to basically operate without any human being basically jumping in. That whole Skynet situation. Skynet, for those of you who don't know, was this fictional AI that was developed in the movie Terminator 2. And at some point, the military develops this to basically autonomously control the US military and make it, more optimal than it ever has been, Basically, they take all of this data and they decide how to, efficiently control one of the most dangerous organizations in the world. Well, at some point, Skynet, after it goes live, literally seconds, if anything, goes fully self-aware and starts a war with humanity where it launches nuclear weapons and basically destroys all of us. Now, this is a hyperbolic situation. It's a sci-fi movie. But one thing that's interesting is Skynet was never really sentient. Yes, it went self-aware that it existed, but effectively, really, if you look at it, it's the closest thing to modern day AIs that we have, where instead of a face entity like Shodan, where it wants to be God and something that mimics humanity, it's basically a set of algorithms that at some point realized, yeah, we gotta kill all the humans, and there was the war. At some point you have to imagine that these faceless LLMs, AIs, and a lot of these machine learning systems, could be used to attack us, and in some ways, right now, they actually are. But anyways, he goes down and says, national service should be a universal duty. We should, as a society, consider moving away from an all-volunteer force and only fight the next war if everyone shares in the risk and the cost. So obviously, what they're calling for is the fucking, draft. They're calling for mandatory service. Now, there are countries in the world where you have to serve in the military, And I often look at this as a way to propagandize individuals. Like, if you're forced to serve in the military, you're forced to do fucked up shit, and you're forced to learn a specific way of life that guides you for the remainder of your years. And that's the thing about the US, right? One of the fucking wildest things is a lot of these big time CEOs, politicians want to talk about universal service. Like, I saw that Rob Schneider was talking about this shit, and immediately I was wondering, why is anybody talking about this crap when they're not even going to be serving? This guy is too old to serve, and in reality, the people that get called to serve their country like this are usually people that don't have a choice. When's the last time you seen a rich kid in America get thrown into the draft like this back in Vietnam? The last time I heard, bone spurs were a fucking thing, really commonly amongst these people. But moving on forward, they talk a lot more about the rest of these situations, about how the atomic age is ending, and now they're entering deterrence based on artificial intelligence. You know, the reality is we use AI to kill people already. We have used nuclear weapons to kill people once in human history, and since then, everyone is effectively scared shitless to use it. Because, well, AI you can control more effectively, as opposed to dropping nuclear weapons. That is some keys that you cannot unturn. The other thing is, Silicon Valley must play a role in addressing violent crime. Many politicians across the US have essentially shrugged when it comes to violent crime, abandoning any serious efforts to address the problem and take on the risk with their constituencies or donors in coming up with solutions and experiments. So again, this is all stuff that we're going to get a little bit deeper into, but ultimately these were excerpts and, pieces taken out from Alex Karp's book. And obviously, it was viewed like 35 million times. People were questioning this guy. They're like, wait a minute, he's talking like motherfucking Sephiroth on the internet. Palantir, I'm an evil-ass corporation, and here's my embarrassing essay, let me spy on you. The reality of it is, I hate companies like Palantir because they have effectively built their entire business off working with law enforcement and militaries to effectively govern and mass surveil us on a huge scale. To give you an idea, a company like Palantir would make Nazi Germany fucking wet itself with how good it can monitor its people and control opposition. This is the same kind of company and the same kind of monitoring that people like the Founding Fathers, the people that built America against the tyranny of the British, the reason why they even rebelled, one of the most ballsiest things you could do in 1776 back in those days was rebel against the British Empire, who had an empire so large that they could just literally, the sun would rise and set in their domain. It's fucking crazy. And these people rebelled because they didn't want to be controlled and governed and fascistically monitored by a fucking country. They made America. And if this was to exist back in 1776, I highly fucking would die on the hill and say that each of the Founding Fathers would load their fucking muskets and raid that shit harder than they ever raided anything in their life. But anyways, ladies and gentlemen, one of the things that really shocks me to my core about this is, again, how this technology is being used to, unfortunately, right now, kill individuals. So obviously, after Palantir posted that insane manifesto, their share price actually dropped. Now, will this come back? Absolutely! And why will it come back? The downside is they're arguably the largest company in the mass surveillance game. If anything, they're the ones who are effectively kissing up to the current day administration and allowing the vast amount of injustices to keep on happening. So for anybody that really doesn't know one of the wildest things, obviously when it comes to Palantir, one of their huge things is the Maven smart system. Now, these are some screenshots that I can show you where obviously they have a bunch of aerial footage, and the reality of it is that it started off as a system where you could look at drone footage, and for instance, if there was a vehicle driving in the drone footage, Palantir systems would basically allow you to identify that vehicle, monitor its movement, see where it was going, basically see through artificial intelligence and computer vision models how it would actually interact with other things in the world. It was basically the ability to spy and monitor individuals like you see in Hollywood movies brought to fucking reality. So obviously this is not the only display. It's not the military that they're only embedded in. There have been cases back in the day where they've been working with, agencies like the Los Angeles Police Department to basically skirt, in my opinion, a lot of legal mechanisms that prevent mass surveillance and just, they basically allow the police to go above and beyond with monitoring people and violating what I believe to be their civil rights through their systems. Now, about 2 months ago in February was the 2026 Meenop school attack, where in Iran, a set of missiles actually repeatedly struck a school where over 100 innocent children were actually killed. Now, again, who led this? Well, the perpetrator was the United States Armed Forces, and yes, the victims were primarily school children. Now, it's easy to kind of sleep at night and, just ignore the internet and ignore like what has been happening around the world. But it's not easy to ignore something like this because of how it ended up happening. So there's a lot of investigations that came out into this, and one of the investigations done by at least CNN was they looked at how this could even happen, right? So obviously at the time, there was talks about how the US government was working with Anthropic, how they were working with Palantir, and they were using these two companies to technologically assist them in identifying, who they would strike. And, once they could identify somebody, they could actually launch strikes against them using these tools. So ultimately, how it actually happened was not something where you necessarily have to blame entirely Palantir or Anthropic. So military investigators in the US believed that when it came out to this, that the reason why this school was identified mistakenly by Palantir and Anthropic and a lot of these software tools was that ultimately the outdated data that it was provided led to this shit happen. Now, obviously that investigation is still entirely ongoing. AI got the blame, but ultimately the people that were actually feeding the AI that information failed to update a database, and other people built a system fast enough to make that failure lethal. So Maven, the system that enabled that kind of speed, didn't have updated information. Now this begs a lot of questions, right? We've built Skynet, and Skynet is able to accurately, based on the data you give it, identify and say, that's a place you should bomb. So if the data was from 2017, and at the time that place was an actual military target, who the fuck didn't go into the system and update it to 2026 standards so the actual software would say, yeah, that's a fucking school, bro. Maybe not fucking bomb it. And then the other question also comes into it. Where the fuck were the human beings to confirm it? Look, a lot of these AI companies will proudly put the disclaimer, it's like, AI makes mistakes, please double check accordingly. Look, it's okay to search something on AI and not double check it if it's something goofy like a fucking recipe. Your food might taste a little bad. But when it comes to bombing children on the other side of the fucking world, I would expect the US military should have enough fucking money to send out a pair of eyes with some binoculars and say, oh yeah, no, guys, hold on. Maybe we shouldn't strike this place. I see a bunch of kids playing in the park. Like, maybe that could have happened. But again, ultimately, at the end of the day, this is the world we live in, all right? All jokes aside, Skynet is a system that has been established, it's here, and it's only going to grow. And unless people actually choose to stop and wake up and realize that these companies are basically running these systems, it's not going to change. Now, one of the things that I was also reading too about this is how close Palantir was not just in the military, but also making money through the US government when it came to building systems like Immigration OS. Now, I've shown you guys this a little bit before, but obviously there have been situations where the US's ICE organization, which is the Immigrations and Customs Enforcement, was buying zero-day malware from allegedly Israeli sources. And obviously another situation that came out was ICE was granted million-dollar contracts to longtime contractors, Palantir Technologies, to make something known as Immigration OS. Now, Immigration OS is similar to Maven from what I've read, and the idea of it is simple, right? Like, basically their systems and the data that they would feed would identify individuals that were illegal immigrants, right? Or areas or pockets where illegal immigration is currently an issue in the US. Now look, whatever your thoughts are on illegal immigration, there's a lot of people that want illegals out of the country, and they will accept any form of fucking draconian surveillance to get rid of those individuals. So Immigration OS is a system that prioritizes these people so that when law enforcement agencies go into these areas, they can basically identify who and what areas that they can raid in, where they can find the most illegals. Now, if you think for a fucking second that something like Immigration OS, once all the illegals have been kicked out of the country, if that's even going to be a thing, when do you think that they'll take Immigration OS and rebrand it to some other fucking group they want to go after? There's a lot of militias and people that, are patriots in the United States. What happens in 2030, 2035 when a lot of these organizations want you out of the country too or want you suppressed? When the fuck do you think they're going to take this same technology and spin it on another group? This is the reality of the situation. The way that mass surveillance is coming in is through a divide and conquer system. They come up with some group they want you to fucking hate, they want you to isolate, and then immediately they will push the most draconian shit on them. It almost reminds me of back in the day when shit like the Patriot Act was passed and people's emails just started to get read through because we wanted to stop shit like terrorism back in the day. But the thing about this is, I've been covering a lot of age verification. I've been covering a lot of encryption like blocks, like a lot of these, governments fighting against us having the right to encrypt our messages and send them from point A to point B. When you look at all of these threads and pillars, you can see that there's a real convergence into a lot of these government entities and corporate entities wanting to get rid of this kind of stuff, because any chance people have to privately share information, self-host entire systems, and go outside the grid of mass surveillance is an actual threat. And, companies like Palantir abso-fucking-lutely don't want you to be able to escape their systems and be outside their viewports, because that's a loss to them. That's not the system that they're working with the government to build. And that's not the world the elites in the government necessarily want you to have. I've heard a lot of talks about things like fucking deep states, but I've never really seen the reality of a deep state until the last couple of years, when a lot of this shit really started accelerating to the point that it is right now. And the reason I choose to talk about it a lot is because if you don't fight back against these shitty systems right now, it's only going to be more solidified, and it's only going to be a system where people will not, like, once you let these systems fester and build up, Palantir is going to be one of many companies that is allowed to violate your civil rights at any given moment. There's been a lot of talks about even other things, like, for instance, I don't know how many of you guys have been following these flock cameras. I know I have. There have been a lot of people that are coming out and saying that they've been targeted unfairly by shit like this. For instance, this is Brandon Upchurch, and his story involves being mauled by a police dog and spending time in jail after a AI camera misread his license plate. So Upchurch said that, when he was accused of stolen plates, he ended up being the actual registered owner. Police records that were reviewed showed what went wrong. A camera, an AI camera, detected his license plate and mistook the 7 on the license plate for a 2. It then pinged Wilson, and in body camera footage, Wilson can be heard telling another officer after the arrest that he thought the camera mishit. Again, he went through all of this shit, and ultimately, the end, it was because a system like this failed on him. This is an ALPR camera, and for instance, when you drive your vehicle past these cameras, they'll just grab what your vehicle is with this yellow square, for instance. This is just an example. They'll grab any extra visual paraphernalia like stickers on your car, what your license plate is, and sometimes they may choose to mistake that entirely. And of course, ultimately, the end of all this, they're using this to surveil where the fuck you go. It used to be that back in the day, you needed a fucking, what was that thing? Like a warrant to identify and see if somebody was, you needed a warrant to actually unnecessarily spy on somebody. You needed to prove you had a reason to violate somebody's civil liberties. But now in the United States alone, there are thousands upon thousands of these cameras. So for instance, here's how they work, right? Let's say you go to the city of Los Angeles. Now the city of Los Angeles has hundreds of cameras in all these locations. So how do these cameras work and how do you bypass, right? Well, imagine that, imagine that you live in East Witter, for instance, right here. You're driving in this general location most of your days. Now, your vehicle is going to hit multiple cameras at some point, whether you like it or not. Because look where they're stationed, main roads, highways, yada, yada, yada. Now, ultimately, it used to be back in the day that if you were being spied on or you were put on a watch list, people would think you're crazy, because why the fuck would the government put somebody on a full-time salary watching you? But now these cameras detect hundreds of thousands of cars, and through machine learning models and AI systems like Maven, like what Palantir is building, can basically identify your daily route, where you're going to, and in some cases, probably who you're consorting with. You know, the days of 1984, Big Brother, mass surveillance, this is how it works, man. Like, people on the other side of the world are getting bombed by these Skynet like systems, but people here are getting monitored just the fucking same too. And in 10 years down the road, when people just completely accept this, it's gonna get to a point where it actually is fucking irreversible. Companies like Palantir, and they hate it when people say it like this, but these companies would rather have you be docile, be monitored, and probably fucking dead. That's ultimately the reality of these situations. They're not companies that really care about your safety and your security. I don't think they do. I think ultimately people like Alex Karp and these fucking billionaires that run these companies and are in bed with the government care more about selling you your rights and your privacy out because they end up getting richer in this process. That's all it is to these fucking people. It's money. But the ethos of what the country is about, the ethos of people's privacy and safety, that doesn't fucking matter to these scumbags. They'd rather you be fucking dead and monitored. That's it. They are building the next pathway for people to be analyzed in every step of the way. And the only way to fucking stop it right now is to actually talk about this, to raise a stink, to deflock the cameras around you, to fucking talk to your representative, no matter where you live, okay? Because right now, yeah, sure, America's the test bed for this crap. But how long until Canada becomes the next test bed? Or Mexico? Or Japan? Or the United Kingdom? Or any other country? Fuck it, the world, dude. Like, it's crazy shit. You know, when I was a kid, I grew up playing stuff like Deus Ex. Okay, I grew up playing games about mass surveillance. I live in a fucking world where we live in an actual cyberpunk reality. Except we don't have the flying cars, we don't have the cool body modifications, we don't have the fucking net running, but I'll tell you what we do have. We have the hundreds of thousands of cameras watching every single thing that we do. We have all the fucking ML systems in the world watching every data packet we send, and not a single fun fucking thing in the world to exist out of it, man. Wild shit. If you like what you saw, please like, comment, and subscribe. Hopefully you learned something. I am out.